legislative branch hearing for the what was I saying about being sharp? Currently, we have 11 hearings scheduled this year, with most being double headers, with the exception being the House budget hearing. While I'm excited to start the 2021 cycle, it is going to be a tough year for the subcommittee. As you all know, the budget cap for 2021 only increased by $2.5 billion for all non-defense agencies. Needless to say, we're going to have some tough decisions to make over the next few months because while the subcommittee is small in size, it has a very important function. Turning to some positive news, I want to give you some subcommittee staffing news. Our clerk, David Reich, has retired, which happens on Capitol Hill from time to time, despite our best efforts to keep him here. But we're lucky that David is being replaced by Matt Washington, who has served on Defense, the full committee, and most recently as clerk of the Military Construction VA Appropriations Committee. So we're happy to have him, a finely tuned college athlete as well, and they served in the Marine Corps as well. So several of you may know him from his work on that subcommittee. He's going to have to get used to taking 6 zeros off of every number. But on the other hand, he can't escape the fights about funding for the border wall. So you'll enjoy it here. I know you'll give him a warm welcome. So let's get started. Ms. Sargis, thank you for being here today to discuss the Open World Leadership Center and your fiscal year 2021 budget. Although the budget for the Open World Center is small as compared to the rest of our legislative branch agencies, it's had a real impact in showcasing U.S. values and democratic institutions in an area of the world where Russian officials stand firmly against our nation's democratic principles. It does so by facilitating visits to the U.S. by legislators and other government officials from Russia, Ukraine, and other countries to meet with their colleagues here. I understand the Center uses the strength and expertise of local volunteer organizations and cost-sharing and grant proposals to maximize savings. This is a benefit to the taxpayer, visiting countries, and local communities, a win-win-win for everyone involved. We're thankful for the leadership of the Center, its staff, and the many volunteers across America who have worked hard to ensure the success of Open World. I look forward to your testimony today and working with you to continue building global relationships. And with that, I would like to yield to my colleague from the great state of Washington, the ranking member, Ms. Ferrer-Butler.
Thank you, Chairman Ryan, and I'm happy to be back here this year to dive into the agencies that make up the first branch of our government, the legislative branch. And although this is the smallest of the 12 appropriations bills, it's still very important. It's the bill that provides the resources that make the other 11 bills possible. As we start consideration for fiscal 2021 budget requests, I look forward to working with you to adequately address the needs of our agencies so they can carry out their respective missions while at the same time balancing that fiscal restraint. Welcome, Mrs. Sargis. Excuse me. The idea of revisualization includes a name change for the Open World Leadership Center, and it's circulated among subcommittee, your trustees, and other members for some time now. I think probably longer than I've been on this subcommittee. The service the Center offers to Congress and to all Americans in all 50 states is the opportunity to engage in congressional diplomacy. The agency advances and then sustains bilateral dialogue between members of Congress, members of Parliament from strategically important countries. And I believe it's time for a makeover. A new name that spells your mission out, something akin to the other congressional support agencies such as the Congressional Budget Office or the Office of Congressional Workplace Rights, perhaps the Congressional Diplomacy Office. You're seeing a theme. A new agency name, I believe, is going to cement the image among members and clearly represent exactly what your mission accomplishes in bringing influential young leaders to the United States to provide firsthand unfiltered information to Congress and experience America at the community level. I look forward to working with Chairman Ryan on this makeover, not your makeover, our makeover. No. I have an 8-month-old. I'm not talking about makeovers. And with that, I thank you and yield back.
Thank you so much. Without objection.
Chairman Ryan, Ranking Member Herrera-Butler, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for welcoming all of us here today. My entire staff is assembled behind me, as you can see, including 2 interns we have for the semester. Everyone thinks they have the best staff in the world, but I really do have the best staff in the world.
Small but mighty.
Chairman Ryan, you'll be pleased and perhaps relieved to hear that the center is not asking for an increase in the 2021 appropriation. Rather, we are thanking you for the increase reflected in this fiscal year. This increase helps the center to achieve its programming goals for the nearly 1,000 emerging leaders from our 17 countries. In addition, you should know that Ohio is now the 3rd most visited state for open world delegations. Ms. Herrera-Butler, last April, members of parliament from Tajikistan went to Chehalis to meet with Carson Coates in your district office. In October, Friendship Forest in Longview will host a Russian delegation focused on national parks and conservation. For Mr. Ruppersberger, on his recommendation, the center is bringing 6 cybersecurity professionals from Estonia, where they will be hosted by the University of Maryland at Baltimore County. Their visit will coincide with the delegation of Ukrainian professionals traveling on the same timely and important theme. Together, they can share experiences since they encounter similar hostile forces. These are a few examples of how the Open World program serves Congress and their constituencies around the country. The mission of the center is to bring the next generation of government and civic leaders from strategic countries directly to the halls of the most powerful legislative body in the world, the United States Congress. This is the very definition of congressional diplomacy, where members are able to engage in authentic dialogue with legislators from around the globe. To that end, we're a clearinghouse for congressional diplomacy efforts, a source of expertise and logistics that enhance member, committee, and caucus work in maintaining productive relationships with parliaments in a strategically important region of the world. Last year, I sat before you in this room and talked about Russia, how we were about to host our 20,000th participant, and how the impact of rising Russian leaders participating in an open world program starts at the bottom up and the periphery in. These exchanges create friendships that have been forged over a cup of tea in the kitchens of more than 8,000 American families in 2,300 communities in all 50 states over 20 years. This is the power of the Open World program, a 2-way path to dialogue and a genuine wish for connection and cooperation. This year I will focus on Ukraine. On the heels of an historic presidential election last spring, 323 new members were swept into Parliament, running on a platform of reform and a wholesale rejection of corruption. 75% of the body is now made up of new members who have never held an elective office. Members whose youth and courage make them well placed to bring about the change the people want so very much. This new generation is the hope for a Western-oriented and robust Ukraine. All this while it faces a hostile enemy in the east and the south of its country. The center has embarked on a bold initiative to expose as many of these members as we can to observe the legislative processes of Congress and our system of lawmaking in state capitals throughout the country. Some of the most critical processes of interest to the Parliament are information services like CRS, committee operations and leadership, the creation of a parliamentary calendar. They're also interested in constituent services, the CVC and consensus building. The center is well positioned to provide programs around these themes. This initiative will launch next month with 3 delegations will travel to North Dakota, New Hampshire, and Texas. These delegations include the leadership of the committees on foreign policy, on energy, on education, and on financial issues. A second travel date is scheduled in April and will include key members of the committees on digital transformation and on agrarian and land policy. This initiative will complement the center's highly regarded civic program for Ukraine, which reached its 4,000th participant in the last year. Today, many of our alumni occupy critical positions in the new government and have become part of the vanguard for reform. 21 MPs are alumni. We also have the Minister and Deputy Minister of Health Care, the Deputy Minister of Veteran Affairs, 2 Deputy Ministers of Education and Science, the first Deputy Prosecutor General, and top advisors to the President Zelensky. In addition, 5 alumni have been appointed to the newly formed High Anti-Corruption Court. Last December, I had the opportunity to spend a week in Kiev on a program planning mission and met with the leadership at the U.S. Embassy, with the Speaker of the Parliament, with several members of Parliament, and with many other stakeholders on the future of a strong and prosperous Ukraine. I was impressed with the resiliency and character of the Ukrainian people. The work of our Ukrainian alumni to create services for veterans, to counter disinformation, to lead health and education reforms, and to fight corruption left an indelible mark on me. What the world is beginning to fully understand is that a corrupt Ukraine is good only for the Kremlin. I appreciate this opportunity to speak before you on our 2021 budget request, and I thank you for the continued support and growing confidence that you've expressed in the work that we do. To that end, the subcommittee's interest and support of the Open World Leadership Center are essential ingredients for the continued success of the Open World program. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a powerful articulation of what you're doing. Thank you so much. We're going to start with Mr. Case, gentleman from Hawaii.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Sargis. Thank you so much for your testimony. To your staff, congratulations on your great work. I live and work in the Asia Pacific, and thank you very much for the summary of your efforts and activities, especially in my own hometown, not just my state, but my hometown of Hilo. So I appreciate that. Good planning on your part, by the way. I guess my question really is, what is your focus in the Asia Pacific? What are your activities in the Asia Pacific? You know, we too often forget that Russia is a Pacific power, and Russia does definitely live and work and play in the Pacific and is influential in the Pacific. And there are, I think, too few opportunities for us in this country to interact with Russia from the perspective of the Asia Pacific and Russia's role in the Asia Pacific. And so, in Hawaii, for example, we have many organizations that are similar to what you are doing, two of which, the principal ones are the East-West Center, which focuses in exactly that, East and West, to include Russia, and the Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies, both of which are in Honolulu. They focus on essentially exchange between countries in that region. And so my question is, although many of your activities have to do with Eastern Europe and Russia in that context, what about the other part of the world?
Thank you for your question. That's a good question. Open World is limited by our Board of Trustees and our statute to countries approved by the board. And to add countries is a process. It's something that we've done. In fact, we have several times added countries. Originally, the program was established just for Russia. And in 2003, we added Ukraine. And then following that, in 2007, other Central Asian and other post-Soviet states were added. To add new countries to our portfolio would require a resolution to go to the board and a quorum to vote yes. We have gone to the board a couple of times to add countries. One time we did go to the board and asked to add countries of the House Democracy Partnership. So we are able to engage in a parliamentary exchange program with any country in the House Democracy Partnership portfolio.
Okay, that's fair. But what about Russia specifically? What about Russia and the Asia Pacific? Are your programs focused in Russia from that perspective as well, the interchange from Russia as a Pacific power to Russia's east rather than Russia's west?
Russia's east, yes. We do reach every region of Russia. There are 83 regions, as I understand it, and we do reach out for that emerging leader from all of the different regions of Russia. We're looking for candidates who can forward or advance the goals of civil society. We're looking for the future change makers, the influencers. The rising leader is typically under the age of 30. And these people are able to come over and experience our ways, but also to leave behind their ways too, and that is part of the exchange. So we do reach all the regions of Russia, and we do try to be relevant and current. Because we're small, which is the way we like it, we have much more flexibility. We are much more nimble about changing the program and turning things around. We're not the Titanic, we're just a little boat. And we can move in different directions very, very quickly. We can also seek advice and counsel from members of Congress.
Do you partner with other organizations? Because it strikes me that if you're small and nimble, you could also partner up with specialist organizations in parts of the world. My part of the world, for example, again, the East-West Center, Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies. Do you do joint programs with them?
We
do you think about
work
that?
very hard to create partnerships, and that is one of the many cost-saving measures I use to make the open world dollar become $1.35. I tell our staff that all the time. Cost sharing is the way we make it happen. And yes, we do partner with organizations, especially with overlapping goals.
Okay. I'd be happy to set you up with those two and a couple of others in Hawaii.
That would be wonderful.
Might project you out in that part of the world without too much additional effort.
That's great. Thank
Thank
you
you very
very
much.
much for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think in line with my opening statement and the program turning 20 last year, I wanted to understand a little bit more about, and some of this does actually, I think, kind of tie into what Mr. Case was saying, just with regard to your vision for the next 20 years and where you're going and how you're going to grow and change. Obviously, when it started, the world looked a little different, and today it does as well. But I was curious to hear you speak to that a little bit more.
The next 20 years will be challenging, but also encouraging, because the center is poised and quite ready to become that entity, that agency for Congress that fulfills and meets and informs foreign policy. So when you are talking to a parliamentarian from a country in this very critical region of the world, you get unfiltered information. You're getting an honest conversation. That will make the difference in how you'd make decisions. It will inform your decisions for the future. And that's a very important role that the center plays for Congress. That is what makes us a congressional agency. And being in Congress means we have the ability to offer that to our participants, our parliamentary participants. That matters a great deal to them. And because we're in Congress, an agency of the Congress, we have no problem with our Russian delegations coming over. Not at all. And that is what has kept us. We're one of the few entities that is able to operate programs at all in Russia today. So, and some of that could be a reflection of perhaps the legacy of Dr. Billington, who created Open World Leadership Center. But there's also because we are people to people. We do not have a parliamentary exchange with Russia. There is language in our bill that says that we cannot, and we do not. But to be fair, it works both ways. It wouldn't happen even if we were able to do it. So we are poised, though, to create an opportunity for a conversation down the road. You could have a conversation with a member of the Duma or the Federation Council if you wanted to down the road, because the work that we do with the citizens, the rising leaders, the young people there who are our 20,000 plus friends now, creates that opportunity. But it's just not ready to happen, but it could happen. And we can help with that if you're interested too.
I wanted to ask, switching kind of, because I've seen you've been in my district a number of times, and certainly very recently, and are planning to go again. Do you have challenges? So there's a few different thoughts I had on that, but do you have challenges finding American host families? Has that changed at all, or are people really open and excited about the opportunity?
There's definitely no difficulty finding host families. In fact, the demand for the Open World delegation is about 3 to 4 times what we can supply.
Really?
Yes. If we have grantees, national level grantees, the Rotary International, Friendship Forest, the Sister City Associations, if we had the resources, they would take 2, 3, 4 times what we're offering. Open World is not really interested in that level of growth. Being nimble makes us more successful. So we like our little agency, we like our little offices, we like the ability to be flexible and nimble and to change and to meet the demands of any member. And we work very closely with the caucuses to achieve that. And but I don't want to bring 3,000 people in a year. It's just not something. It would be such a strain. We would have to grow.
Yeah. Okay.
And we're not prepared to do that. We're not. We think being small and nimble is more effective.
Got it. Thank you. Go back.
Commissioner Newhouse.
Thank you, Chairman Ryan.
Thank you.
Dr. Sarkis. It's fascinating. I think I missed a hearing on this. I just thought you guys seem to know a lot more about this than I do, so it's interesting to me. Thank you very much. So just a couple of questions that have come to mind. I think I only have a few minutes. These are not elected leaders. These are rising potential leaders in communities in these other countries, correct?
Yes, except that we also have a local legislator program.
Oh, okay.
We found that the national parliaments do like our working with local legislators because, of course, they have to work with them, too.
So how do you identify who you want to target to come over?
Well, we have several sources. We work very closely with our embassies in our countries. That's a very, very common source of nominations because they're on the ground and they know who that young leader is. They know who's making news and who is or making waves or not. They know who is that young person. We have that as a source. We also have, except in Russia, in every other country, USAID is also on the ground, and they have very strong programs going on in our countries, and they are also familiar with the people who would benefit from an open world program. The peer-to-peer part, because we don't provide technical training. This is not a training or an education program. It's a peer-to-peer professional program.
Exposure.
And then finally, our alumni are often in a position to nominate because they go back to their countries and they talk about their experience and they realize, oh, I think you would benefit. I would like to nominate you. And it is nominations, not self-nominations. Everyone is required to be vetted by the embassy, of course, for their visas. And so it becomes a pretty clean process. So
how do you, then on the other hand, how do you pick where you take them in the United States? Do you rotate that? Is there a certain, does you have to meet a certain set of criteria for a state or how's that done? And partly, my district is very rural. I don't know if you've mentioned Mr. Rare Butler's district. I don't know if you've come to Central Washington State. Okay. But there's, you'd like to make sure that they are exposed to both urban and rural areas of the country.
So you ask a very good question. We have a grant process, and we give grants to 12 to 15 national grantees, something like Rotary International. Now, Rotary has clubs in every state and even the rural parts of the state. So Rotary is an important source for us for hosting opportunities. Friendship Force is in every state. It's another organization that works nationally. There are sister city organizations, and they're very robust partner with us to find communities. So we do aim to go to every state every year. It has its challenges, but we do try to do that.
Every year.
Every year.
Okay.
We do. Usually it's in the upper 40s. I mean, strangely, sometimes some states are very difficult to host in for 1 year. So we do try to reach every state every year. And as for the district that we end up in, it's a combination of, what district do you represent, but also where can we find that hosting community. But once we find the hosting community, we work with that grantee and that hosting community to create a program that meets the demand. So in 2017, we took Georgian engineers from the Republic of Georgia to they came from the Angori Dam, and they spent, 3 days in the Grand Coulee Dam area. They were really interested in tourism, believe it or not. I mean, this is something they're trying to promote in the Republic of Georgia, so it was a really fascinating and very, very exciting delegation that went there in 2017.
Good. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I commend you on your memory for all of that. So another question came to mind. You said this is an exchange. So that implies to me that then Americans go to these countries. Is that the case or not?
They do. A lot of our host families are people who are already interested in international culture. They believe in they love travel. So the exchange part that we do is the exchange of information. It's best practices. And when I greet the groups that come each month, one of the things I tell them is that yes, you take away a lot of our best practices. You watch what we're doing. You see lawmaking in action. But what they leave behind is a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of affection and a little bit of friendship that begins to grow when they go back.
Sure.
And a lot of our young delegates who stay with empty nesters, you can imagine this conversation, they go back and they talk about their American parents.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And they communicate, they send emails, they visit. That happens very, very frequently. Our rule of law program, a lot of our judges have traveled to our open world countries at the invitation of the judges that they hosted.
I see. Well, it sounds like an awesome program, and thank you very much for
Thank you.
sharing so much.
Thank you.
I think it's a great investment, but I also want to commend you for not asking for an increase as well. So thank you.
Don't need it.
Thank you. The question is, how much wine did they buy when they were in Washington State?
In Georgia.
That's what he really wanted to ask.
It's pretty famous.
It's really an impressive program. I mean,
Thank you.
I've been a fan of this since I first learned about it. And we know that the budget has been flat funded since 2016. Last year in this hearing, we talked about the opportunities that would maybe present themselves about raising some outside money.
Yes.
Have you been able to kind of tease that out and put a strategy together around that?
Thank you for that question. Outside fundraising or outside funds is a sensitive issue for Open World. I can't tell you exactly in this hearing, I can talk to you about this later, but there are strings attached to private money. And Open World is a nonpartisan legislative branch agency, and we have a single mission. We're not like the Library of Congress with lots of things going on, and of course, they are able to accept gift funds for projects and stuff, but we only do one thing at the Open World Program. We provide exchange opportunities for rising leaders and parliamentarians to meet with their counterparts here in the United States. So I tend to be careful around private funds and the strings that often come attached with it. We have done some exploration on this topic, and it is important for us. And we do have a donor who is anonymous who does fund our alumni program, and that is very successful. It targets mostly Russia and Ukraine, but we do have agreements with our embassies to do periodic alumni events in our country so that our alumni network stays in touch with us, and we learn what they're doing and what they're changing. And as I mentioned, a lot of our alumni are doing very important things in Ukraine. So I'm very careful about looking at outside money that has an agenda often,
Sure.
which does not suit our nonpartisan nature. So I tend to be very careful, very cautious about that.
Okay. Yep. Go ahead. Yeah, please. Happy to yield.
Because I appreciate the gentleman, because last year we brought this up, and part of the reason I brought this up last year was we just don't know funding-wise what's going to happen. And we all agree this is an incredibly important program. I would encourage you to not look at fundraising or support as necessarily partisan or someone having strings attached. Certainly that's part of it. But I've done development for a nonprofit that had nothing to do with politics, and I wrote grants. Right? So there are a ton of foundations out there who want to do nothing but foster relationships. I'm not saying go raise money from some political organization,
Right.
but for the longevity and the security of the program, this is one of the ones where if things get tight, people are going to say, well, this isn't directly related to, da-da-da-da-da-da. Yet we all here acknowledge how significant it is and how important it is. So I would encourage you not, a development person or someone who could write grants could identify those things, and they could make their own money from writing the grant. So I wouldn't just push this
Okay.
off. I think it's significant, and you can do it in a way that you're not giving away your mission or your values, certainly. There just are so many opportunities out there, and for something like this today, when Russia and Ukraine are all over the news, and who knows what's happening, what's going on with the relationships, for you guys to step in and say, hey, we're building relationships with future leaders, and we're exposing them directly peer-to-peer, I just think there's a lot of opportunity to pull down resources. I guess I would encourage you, along with what the chairman's saying, to continue to explore that. I yield back.
Yeah, amen. I mean, I think there are opportunities out there. lot of billionaires we hear about these days that would, potentially see the value in this. And I just think the parliament to parliament, Congress to Congress, we see it today in the world that there's a lot of people in Congress have been here 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, relationships that well outlast the executive branch.
Yes.
And that's, I think, at the heart of the value that you provide. And one of the reasons I think we want to figure out how to continue to expand this, even if it's limited within the context of our budget, because of the value you provide. And it's not sexy, it's not something people you see on the front page of the paper, but at the end of the day, I remember when we traveled years ago, Chairman Obie was the chair of the Appropriations Committee, who had been in 40 years, and we went to Northern Ireland, and he was just telling these stories about his relationship that he had with a lot of people in Ireland over the years that helped put together the fund necessary to help the peace deal when President Clinton was going over. But it was those deeper relationships that were behind the scenes that had a real impact. And so that's what I want you to hear when we're saying, like,
Yes.
let's help you grow this thing. So we appreciate it. I have one last question. One thing that was impressive is the difference in the cost between open world versus the executive branch programs, with open world's cost being somewhere between $9,000 versus $19,000 per person in the executive branch. How are you able to do that?
Well, to be fair, the executive branch State Department program is longer and they stay in hotels. It's the homestay.
You don't have to be fair to the executive branch. Yeah. So they stay longer and they stay in hotels.
And they stay in hotels. We do, they have some community events and activities and interactions, but I am by career a budget officer. So I went to Open World as its budget officer. So I create the budgets and I work on how to maximize the dollar. And from the very beginning, I saw my mission as a budget officer to help Open World achieve its goals with what you have. And from the time I started there, right before I started there to now, the center has experienced something like a 60% cut in its annual appropriation. So that's not a problem, it's just a challenge. And to meet the challenge, I looked for ways for cost shares and to increase that component. So the first organization I went to would be all the grantees, the national organizations. And because they like hosting our delegations and they want more, they were willing to help with the cost per person by agreeing to do more for less, or the same amount for less. And that was the first place. The second place was we took upon ourselves these direct relationships with our embassies in our open world countries. When I work directly with an embassy, I'm not paying anybody's overhead. We're not paying for staffing and all the components that drive up the cost of any program. So we save money using via the MOU with our embassies in our open world countries. And because the numbers of people that we're bringing are small in most of our countries, meaning 24 to 36 participants, they like doing it too because they're already involved because of the visa and the vetting process for the candidates. So we work with embassies, we reached out to our grantees, our big logistical contractor, which is the American Councils for International Education, that's based here in Washington, D.C. They're also a partner, and they cost share with us. That's the benefit of working with someone who understands how money works, and so they agree with me that they would prefer to continue hosting, and they work with us very, very well to reduce those costs. And we do this every year. We took upon ourselves to manage all interpretation costs in-house. Instead of having every grant build in an interpreter, all that overhead is gone now. That doesn't happen anymore. We do it ourselves. So that management of the interpretation program for every delegation has interpreters. is a savings to us of hundreds of thousands of dollars. We do it ourselves because we're not paying overhead and airfares and all the rest of it because we find interpreters who are local. So there are lots of ways to save money. And because I work at the micro level at Open World, it's not that hard to do it. You know, sometimes people grumble, but we mostly get a lot of cooperation because our grantees and our hosting network want to host. They want to work with us. So we get a lot of cooperation that way. And we're very nice to work with, so.
I may nominate her to be Secretary of Defense. Imagine what she could squeeze out of that budget. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate all your work, and let's continue to have conversations about the private sector
Okay.
stuff we
That'd be
talked
great.
about and the foundation stuff. So thank you.
Thank
This
you.
committee is adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, we're going to gavel in the hearing, call the hearing to order on the United States Capitol Police. Thank you, Chief Sund, Assistant Chiefs Yogananda Pittman and Chad Thomas, Chief Administrative Officer, Richard Braddock, and members of the Capitol Police Executive Team for joining us today to discuss the United States Capitol Police Fiscal Year 2021 budget request. The Capitol Police is obviously an essential agency of the legislative branch. Chief, your team is charged with keeping Congress, our colleagues, its members, employees, visitors, and facilities, both here and within our districts, safe and protected from harm's way. The men and women of the Capitol Police put their lives on the line each day to ensure Congress can operate efficiently. You do your job so that we can do ours in a safe, secure, but open environment. Thank you, Chief, and all the officers and civilians of the Capitol Police that work tirelessly to ensure the safety and security of the Capitol complex. Currently, resources for Capitol Police are almost 10% of the entire legislative branch budget, totaling $464 million. For fiscal year 2021, the department has requested $520 million, which is a 12% or $56 million increase over the fiscal year 2020 enacted total. We appreciate your commitment to keeping our Capitol complex physically safe, Safety, security, and wellness remain the subcommittee's top priorities. With that being said, Chief, thank you, and the department again for your service. I look forward to your testimony today, and with that, I would like to yield to my colleague, Ranking Member Jamie Herrera Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chief Sund, and to all of you for being here today. And congratulations on your promotion this past June, and welcome to your first appropriates hearing as Chief, right? Your background with the Metropolitan Police Department and time as Assistant Chief, I think, makes an ideal combination for fresh ideas paired with some institutional knowledge. I look forward to working with you to ensure that the Capitol complex and campus stays safe for both lawmakers, but for our visitors or the American people. The United States Capitol Police is the most visible legislative branch agency here on Capitol Hill, whether it's driving around on the surrounding streets, entering any of the buildings, or walking our hallways and grounds. The Capitol Police are always present and on the watch, which makes me feel good, ensuring the safety of the millions of people that are on Capitol Hill each year. The department is constantly being asked to do more. Over the last few years, that has included things like protecting the O'Neill House, the office building, the garage security, the pre-screeners, the house child care expansion, and most recently, the Little Scholars Daycare Center. So Chief, you and your team, I think, have really stepped up to the plate time and again to get the job done, and I thank you all for that very much. Another reality is the department has been involved in a number of disciplinary and litigation issues that have been quite public over the last few years, and although the facts for each case are different, one observation I will offer is that the department would certainly benefit from two things. One is an updated collective bargaining agreement between the department and the union, and I know you've just started, I think you've just started those negotiations. And the second is an improved internal process and procedures for consistent discipline and performance reviews. So again, I thank each of you, not just for being here, but for what you do. And we are very, very grateful. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Without objection, Chief Sund, your written testimony will be made part of the record. This in mind, please summarize your statement and highlight your efforts of the past year to the committee. After your statement, we will move to the question and answer period. So please begin.
Thank you for the, there we go. Thank you for the very kind remarks. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present the department's fiscal year 2021 budget request. We greatly appreciate the subcommittee's continued support by providing the necessary resources to carry out our crucial mission. Joining me today are Assistant Chief Yogananda Pittman, Assistant Chief Chad Thomas, and Chief Administrative Officer Richard Braddock. Also joining us are Michael Bolton, Capitol Police Inspector General, and Gus Papathanasio, Chairman of the Capitol Police Fraternal Order of Police.
How do you spell
Papathanasio? No. A couple different ways, no. Anyway, they play an important role in our successful operation, and I truly appreciate their contributions. Mr. Chairman, as was mentioned in the opening statements, as the only law enforcement agency responsible for protecting Congress and the Capitol complex, the policing we engage in is highly specialized to focus on unique requirements of protecting our legislative process and maintaining a safe, open environment. We detect, investigate, and prevent threats made against Congress. We provide steady, watchful presence throughout the Capitol complex as we are responsible for ensuring the continuity of government. As Chief, I could not be more proud to lead this department and our dedicated team whose commitment to protecting this institution is on full display each and every day. I look forward to leading this department into the next decade, especially as our responsibilities continue to grow in number and in scope. We recently added the O'Neill office building, house garages, and pre-screening security capabilities into our portfolio. And the growing number of threats, along with our increased efforts to coordinate with law enforcement agencies in the National Capital Region and across the country, continues to be of grave concern and a major focus on our resources. Since 2017, threats against Congress has increased 124%, and our law enforcement coordination efforts have increased by 236%. To ensure that we have the needed oversight of our increasing responsibilities, upon becoming chief, I added a second assistant chief to our command staff. Today, we have an assistant chief that oversees uniformed operations and one dedicated to our preventive and intelligence operations. Another priority is to further strengthen our threat detection and assessment capabilities. As threats against Congress continues to increase and evolve, so must our capabilities. To achieve this, we are identifying needed technologies, staffing, and process enhancements, and we are constantly working to maintain strong partnerships within the intelligence community. In the past 6 months, we have thwarted a number of serious threats against members of Congress that have led to a number of arrests. Just as important, based on our thoroughness of our investigations, is that these cases are being prosecuted across the country. This summer, we will be playing a crucial role in both the Democratic and Republican national conventions. Each of these events requires extensive planning and resources, and we are working closely with our various partners to enhance the protection of members at these events. Paramount to our successful executing our mission is the health and well-being of our people. Therefore, a new Employee Wellness and Resiliency Division under the Chief Administrative Officer was established last fall. It is charged with addressing employees' physical, nutritional, mental, and financial well-being. It will also expand department-wide efforts to further promote overall well-being and a healthy work-life balance of our employees. To continue to be a leader within federal law enforcement and to get ahead of potential threats, we have developed this budget request with an emphasis on providing specialized training as well as obtaining tools and technologies needed to maintain the highest levels of readiness. Our budget request will allow us to meet our mandatory salary requirements, fund critical training, ensure the security of the upcoming inauguration, and address other mission-related expenses. It does not include requests for any additional FTE. However, we are facing increasing personnel costs due to outside requirements. Specifically, we are requesting $7.9 million to cover an increase in OPM-mandated employee retirement benefit cost increases. In addition, we are requesting $7.8 million for the FY 2021 COLA and related benefit costs. Next January, the Capitol will be the center of global attention as it hosts the presidential inauguration. Our planning is underway, and our budget request includes $2.9 million in overtime for inaugural-related events. Our general expense request includes funds to upgrade network and infrastructure equipment, computer hardware and software, and specialty equipment. Also included is $3.6 million to replace the antiquated annunciator system that was installed after September 11th. As threats continue to change, so too should the tools we use to communicate with Congress. Mr. Chairman, to ensure that we're always at the ready, it is important that we make these crucial investments in our people and our resources. This budget request was developed with great thought and discipline to ensure that the necessary mission requirements were at the forefront of our planning and prioritization. In closing, I just want to note that while physical security are important, it is our officers that are our greatest assets in helping prevent threats and respond to any crisis. Our team continues to impress me with their professionalism, whether it is conducting security screening, providing valuable support behind the scene, or responding to a threat or emergency. Again, I thank the subcommittee for your support. We will work with you to ensure that we meet the needs of Congress and to successfully accomplish our mission today while preparing for the challenges tomorrow. I'm prepared to address any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and I know that every one of us means this when we say thank you so much for your service, all of your service. It certainly is very comforting that you're all on the job. And we obviously are here to help you do your job. You made a comment in your testimony that outside law enforcement coordination efforts had increased 237% since 2017. I think that was the testimony. And I'm asking you, what exactly does that mean? And the reason I'm asking it is because obviously we all members don't only live and work in the Capitol, where you take very good care of us, but we're out in our districts. None of us wants to go into a shell. We want to be out there interacting with the public. We do that. It's part of our jobs. And yet the reality is that that is a more risky enterprise than it used to be. And your projection, therefore, of the protection that you provide out of the Capitol and into our communities is critical. And I know I've benefited from this back in Hawaii, where I do frequent open house community meetings, and we tell you every time, and you coordinate back with Honolulu, the police department, and we have coverage at those town meetings, which is very comforting, not just for me, but for my staff and my guests there. But that all comes at a expenditure of time and I assume money. And so I'm curious what the demands are in terms of your projection out of the Capitol and whether you believe that you are adequately servicing those needs, whether there are issues there that need to be addressed, and whether there are financial issues that are not being addressed. For example, I don't really know what the agreement is between Capitol Police and Honolulu Police Department. Is it just a request to take over from that perspective with no financial compensation for that? And I'm not saying it should be. I'm just asking the bigger question is how do you handle the increasing projection of your responsibilities out of the Capitol itself?
Thank you very much for the question. That's a very good question, and we look at it as, we have a lot of resources around the Capitol and the National Capital Region to provide the security that's necessary around here. Like you said, we have many members around the country with their district offices in every state and area, including Hawaii. This is a way of us working smarter, not necessarily harder, to provide the protection that we need, and it's based on really an assessment of an event. You had talked about a lot of times you'll contact our department and mention that you have an event. The first thing that happens is we do an assessment of the event. We do an assessment of any concerning communications regarding the event and determine is this something that the local law enforcement can handle. We've got great relationships with the law enforcement across the country, and most of the time it's a call out to a representative with that agency to let them know, and they will have the officer, usually it's the officer that patrols the immediate area, will provide additional coverage for that. If our assessment indicates that the need be, we will deploy actually our resources to that to provide additional coverage, and again, it's based on the assessment. So right now, when we get that additional coverage, it's a way of us expanding our protection over the members, and most of the time, it's not at a cost when we're utilizing the local and state resources that we have out there. So that's kind of how that works, but it provides us the ability to provide protection to the various district offices around the country in an effective manner based on an effective assessment of the event.
Do you believe that from a fiscal perspective, just a raw financial resources perspective, you are able to handle that doubling, actually more than doubling, of your coordination efforts with other law enforcement agencies that I assume is simply going to continue to ramp up? So, we've seen it 237% in just a few years, and I assume that that's not plateauing at this point. You probably have to do more coordination as time goes on. So are you okay from a financial perspective with handling that coordination?
Yeah, with the budget and the outlook, like I said, it was 236% increase since 2017. I think right now we're up to 1,000. Last year we did 1,715 law enforcement coordinations. So we do see it increasing. We're utilizing our existing staff to be able to address that. So I think we're in a good place to be able to address it, but we're always trying to identify, efficiencies, ways that we can coordinate it, because we see a true value in having that coordination done. And then when we deploy, we work very closely with our House and Senate Sergeant at Arms to evaluate our assessment of an event, and we deploy. And again, that deployment of our resources, we feel is critical if the assessment determines that we need to put resources on the ground. I think we're in a good place to do that.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say you're okay with the way things are right now, and I just want to make sure that is okay, because again, I think that is a growing part of your job and an increasingly important part of your job.
Right. It's definitely a stress on resources, but it's something that we see, it's something that we monitor, and we're in place to identify ways that we can try and continue to cover it. It is a significant increase. 236%, up to over 1,700 last year, but it's something that we feel necessary to have to cover.
Okay. Thank you very much.
We also put security money in the MRA for those kind of things too locally. If I do a town hall in Akron, Ohio, it's the Akron PD that's there, and we have a little bit of money now to try to help facilitate that, so to relieve some of the pressure from you. Mr. Herrera Butler.
Thank you. So you had referenced the new, not department, but entity for addressing and helping with work-life balance, and that's an area where I'm interested in for department employees in relation to pregnancy and nursing. As a mother, obviously a top issue for me is ensuring that pregnant women are fairly and reasonably accommodated in the workplace, which actually I have introduced legislation on. But my question is, what has the department undertaken to date to assist working mothers or pregnant women in the workplace?
Thank you very much for the question. That's a very good question, and I share your concern. Being a father of three, I know the impact it can have with a mother coming into the workplace and having to deal with pregnancy and nursing. And it's something that we value our employees. We want to make sure that our employees, are able to come to work and provide as much service as possible, but feel very valued in our response. So there's been a couple things that we've done actually to address pregnancy and nursing. Back in May, we developed a temporary restricted duty policy. What that does is it allows officers that are not able to provide full duty service to actually get into a administrative or a function that they're able to not, don't have to wear their uniform, don't have to carry all the equipment, but they can still provide a function. So back in May, we developed this, and what it's specifically addressed for pregnant nursing women is that 6 months in advance of delivery, they can come in and request a temporary restricted duty position. So that allows them to get in a temporary restricted duty position. That policy also allowed post-delivery 12 months of restricted duty, because we know a lot of times some of the recommendations for nursing is 12 months following delivery. So it's something that it can be extended based on needs, and even the 6 months in advance based on medical needs of the mother can be extended. Working and in addition, working with the union, we identified a way that really needed to be streamlined. Back in December, we actually determined that there was a way that for pregnant or nursing women to get into the temporary restricted duty policy needed to be streamlined, that allowed them to, all they have to do now, rather than going through a process that could take a couple of days to get them into the temporary restricted duty position. Once they let an official know, they'll immediately be placed into a restricted duty position. No questions asked. There's no need for a follow-up fitness for duty. They get put into the position. We try to make it as easy as possible and streamlined as possible. And I gotta say, it was a good coordination between the union and us. They brought a concern to our attention. We addressed it within 24 hours. We had a policy change, and we had it addressed, so it was much more streamlined and much more beneficial, I think, to the working mothers that we value.
Well, I think this is an area where we're seeing across the nation, it's just time to make sure that we're addressing it. And if there's an opportunity for a reasonable accommodation, by all means, thank you for leading and making that happen, because it's not happening everywhere, and there are some pretty big consequences. And considering women are a significant, actually now we're the most, right, in the workplace. I think there's more women in the workforce today than there are men. And